This is HOA Storytime Central. The sidewalk refroze and she acted like I did it on purpose. You are parked during snow removal hours and the tow is happening. That is what Deborah Morgan yelled at me from the sidewalk while I stood in my own driveway at 6:45 in the morning, holding a shovel, staring at her and the tow truck idling behind her in the street. My truck was not parked during snow removal hours. My truck was in my driveway, off the street, exactly where it was supposed to be. But Deborah did not care about facts. I live in Burlington, Vermont, in a neighborhood managed by the Twin Oaks Snow Route Association, and I work as a pool service technician, which means I understand HOA politics better than most people, because I have seen how management enables the loudest person in every community I service. Deborah Morgan is the Architectural Committee Chair, and she has been on my case since November when a salt bag delivery sat on my porch for 1 hour, and she photographed it, claimed it was permanent storage, and tried to fine me $300. That bag triggered everything that came after, and now, in the middle of a February blizzard, she was trying to tow my truck for a violation that did not exist. I looked past her at the tow truck driver, a guy in an orange safety vest who was standing by the cab, clearly not sure what he was supposed to be doing. I said, "My truck is not on the street." Deborah whipped around, clipboard in hand with those colored tabs she waves like a weapon, and snapped back. "The edge of your driveway snow is blocking plow access, which makes it an obstruction under emergency snow route rules, and I am authorizing removal of the vehicle contributing to the obstruction." I did not argue. I just stood there, because I already had something in my pocket she did not know about. I had been gathering proof for 2 months, and this moment was exactly the kind of overreach I needed her to commit on camera. My neighbor across the street, a renter advocate named Lena who knows how to file complaints and has been helping me document every interaction, was filming from her porch. I could see her phone screen turned away, pointed at us. Deborah stepped closer, shoving a folded snow emergency policy sheet in my face. She does this every time we argue. That sheet has become her signature move. She said, "I do not care what the weather did. I care what the rule says. You were notified. You had time to clear the edge. Now you are in violation, and the tow is happening." I said, "I cleared my driveway last night. That edge snow came from the plow that went through at 3 in the morning." Deborah shook her head hard, hair barely moving under her hood, and said, "That is not my problem. The rule says homeowners are responsible for driveway edges within 6 hours of the last plow pass. You are over 6 hours. I can make this a lean conversation in 1 email." That line. "I can make this a lean conversation in 1 email." She had said it to me twice before, once during the salt bag incident, and once when I left a snow shovel leaning against my garage door for 2 days in December. It was her threat, her power move, and every time she said it, I took a screenshot or saved the email, because I knew it would come back to bite her later. The tow truck driver called over, asking if she had authorization in writing, and Deborah marched toward him, clipboard up, pulling a printed page from under the clip. I used that moment to pull out my phone and open the folder I had been building. I had photos of my driveway timestamped from 11 p.m. the night before, showing it completely clear. I had photos from 4:30 a.m., right after I woke up to the scraping sound of the plow dumping a berm, showing the fresh pile. And I had an email from the management company, sent 3 weeks ago, admitting that the notice date on a previous violation was wrong, and that they could not verify I had been informed of a hearing I supposedly missed. That email was part of a chain I had been pulling on for weeks. The HOA had started hitting me with notices in December, claiming I missed a hearing about the salt bag storage. I never got a hearing notice. I checked my mail, my email, my spam folder. Nothing. When I pushed back, the management company sent me a new notice with a different date, and when I compared them side by side, the dates did not match. That was when I realized Deborah was fabricating violations, altering dates, and recycling old photos to make it look like I was a repeat offender. I walked toward the tow truck, and Deborah saw me coming. She turned fast, stepping between me and the driver, and said, "You do not talk to him. You talk to me. I am the enforcement officer for this route." I said, "You are not a cop. You are a committee chair. And my truck is not on the street, so there is nothing to tow." The driver looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Deborah, then at me, then at my truck sitting fully in the driveway, with no part of it touching the curb or the street. He said, "I need a clear violation for the dispatch log. If the vehicle is not in the road, I cannot hook it." Deborah started yelling. "The snow he failed to clear is the obstruction. The vehicle is the source, and you are authorized under the emergency order to remove it." That was when my elderly mother opened the front door. She had been staying with me since January because her apartment heat went out and the landlord was dragging his feet on repairs. The stress of this HOA situation was making everything harder for her. She is 76 and does not need to wake up to screaming and tow trucks. She called out, asking what was happening, and I told her to go back inside, that I had it under control. Deborah turned toward the house and said, "This is a compliance matter, and interference will result in additional fines." I felt my hands tighten around the shovel handle. I said, "Do not talk to my mother." Deborah spun back toward me, that policy sheet out again, and said, "Then comply. Clear the snow. Pay the fine. Stop pretending you are special." The tow truck driver shook his head, climbed back into his cab, and said he was not hooking a vehicle that was not in the road. He pulled away, lights still flashing, and Deborah stood there in the middle of the street, shouting after him that she would report him for non-compliance. Then she turned on me and said, "This is not over. You just escalated this to the board level." She walked away, and I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, watching her disappear around the corner. Lena came over from her porch, phone still in hand, and said, "I got all of it. She threatened your mother on camera." I said, "Good. I need everything." She said, "What is your next move?" I said, "I am going to force them to show me the paperwork they keep referencing, because I do not think it exists." That was the thing. Every notice Deborah sent referenced prior violations, prior hearings, prior warnings. But when I asked for copies, the management company either ignored me or sent me documents with dates that did not line up. I had filed a records request 2 weeks ago, asking for every notice, every hearing record, every fine authorization tied to my address. They had 14 days to respond under state law, and the deadline was tomorrow. I went inside, checked on my mother, and then sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up the email chain and started drafting a demand letter to the board. I included the time-stamped photos from this morning, a summary of the tow truck incident, and a request for an emergency hearing to address Deborah's conduct. I also attached the management company's admission that the prior notice date was wrong, and I wrote in bold text that I would be filing a formal complaint with the state HOA ombudsman if I did not get a written response within 48 hours. I sent it at 7:30 a.m., carbon copied to the entire board, the management company, and my attorney. My attorney is a guy I went to high school with who does real estate law. He had been advising me quietly for a month, telling me to document everything and not to pay any fines until I had a full accounting of what they were claiming I owed. He called me 10 minutes after I sent the email and said, they are going to panic. You just put them on notice that you have proof they screwed up the dates. If they double down now, they are opening themselves up to a lawsuit. By 8 a.m., I had a response from the management company. It was short and defensive. They said Deborah had authorization to enforce emergency snow route rules and that my complaint would be reviewed at the next board meeting in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. They were trying to stall, hoping I would give up or pay the fine just to make it stop. But I had something they did not know about, and I was not playing that card yet. The thing I had in my pocket was a copy of an approved architectural request from 2 years ago, back when I first bought the house. I had submitted a request to install a wider driveway apron to handle snow clearing equipment, and the board had approved it in writing. That approval included a clause that said the homeowner would not be responsible for snow displacement caused by municipal or HOA contracted plow services within the approved apron area. Deborah had been on the architectural committee when that request was approved. She knew it existed. But 6 months ago, when I asked for a copy during a different dispute, she claimed the file had been lost in a management company transition and that I would need to resubmit the request. I did not resubmit. I had kept my original copy, and I had the board meeting minutes from the approval vote. I had been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment, because I knew if I used it too early, she would find a way to spin it or bury it. But now, with her threatening liens and towing and fabricating violations, I knew the time was coming. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama and satisfying payback. That same morning, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA, dated 4 days ago, claiming I had failed to attend a mandatory compliance hearing on February 9th. Today was February 14th. The hearing was supposedly 5 days ago, and I never received a notice. I opened the envelope and saw that the letter had been mailed on February 12th, 3 days after the hearing date. It was impossible for me to have attended a hearing I was not told about until after it happened. I called my attorney immediately. He said, "That is fabrication of process. If they are backdating notices to create a paper trail, that is fraud. You need to file a complaint with the state, and you need to do it today." I said, "I have a records request deadline tomorrow. If they do not produce the documents, I am filing everything at once." He said, "Good. And stop engaging with Deborah directly. Everything goes through me or the management company from now on. If she shows up at your house again, do not open the door. If she approaches you outside, film it and walk away. Do not give her anything she can twist." I agreed, but I knew Deborah was not going to stop. She had escalated too far, and she was in too deep to back down without losing face. The next move was going to be hers, and I needed to be ready. By noon, my contractor called. He handles ice dam work, and he had been scheduled to come out that week to inspect my roof. He said, "I cannot get to your house. There is an HOA notice on the street sign saying no vendor access without prior authorization, and when I called the management company, they told me your address is flagged for compliance review, and all vendor work is suspended pending resolution." I said, "They cannot do that." He said, "I am just telling you what they told me. If I show up and they file a complaint, I lose my vendor license with the township. I cannot risk it." I said, "How long do I have before the ice dam gets worse?" He said, "You have maybe a week before the next freeze cycle. After that, you are looking at interior water damage." That was the moment I realized this was not just about fines and harassment anymore. They were actively trying to prevent me from maintaining my property, which could lead to real damage and real costs. That was a new level of retaliation, and it gave me leverage I did not have before. I called my attorney back and told him. He said, "That is tortious interference. If they are blocking necessary maintenance and it results in damage, they are liable. Document the contractor's call, get it in writing if you can, and add it to the complaint." I sent the contractor a follow-up email asking him to confirm the conversation in writing, and he did. He sent me a one-line email saying the HOA management company told him my address was flagged and vendor access was restricted. That afternoon, the records request deadline passed. I sent a follow-up email to the management company at 5 p.m. asking for confirmation that they had received my request and when I could expect the documents. I got an automated out-of-office reply saying the office was closed due to weather. I checked the weather report. There was no active storm. The roads were clear. They were stalling. I forwarded the out-of-office reply to my attorney with a note that said, "They are running out the clock." He replied, "File the complaint tomorrow morning. I will draft a demand letter tonight and send it certified mail. If they do not respond within 72 hours, we go to the ombudsman and we file in small claims for the contractor costs." That night, I could not sleep. My mother asked me if I was okay, and I told her I was handling it, but the truth was, I felt like I was drowning in paper and procedural tricks. Every time I pushed back, they added another layer. Another notice. Another fee. Another rule I had supposedly broken. It was designed to overwhelm me, to make me give up, and it was working on my stress levels even though I knew I had the proof to win. At 2 in the morning, I got up and went through my folder again. I had the time-stamped photos. I had the email admission about the wrong notice date. I had the certified letter that arrived after the hearing date. I had the contractor's email about vendor access being blocked. And I had the approved architectural request with the snow displacement clause. I laid it all out on the kitchen table and took a photo of the whole spread, just to have a visual record of everything in one place. The next morning, February 15th, I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA ombudsman. The form asked for a narrative summary, so I wrote out everything: the salt bag incident in November, the fabricated hearing notice in December, the altered dates, the tow truck threat, the vendor access block, and the pattern of harassment. I attached every document I had. The system confirmed receipt and said I would get a response within 10 business days. At 9 a.m., my attorney sent the demand letter via certified mail and email. It was 3 pages long and laid out every violation of process, every procedural failure, and every instance of retaliation. It demanded a full accounting of all fines, a written retraction of the vendor access block, and a formal hearing with the full board where I could present my evidence. It also put them on notice that if they continued to fabricate notices or retaliate, I would pursue damages in court. Within an hour, I got a phone call from the management company. It was the property manager, a guy named Eric who I had spoken to twice before. He said, "We need to de-escalate this situation." I said, "Then produce the documents I requested and lift the vendor access block." He said, "The vendor access block was a miscommunication. That is being lifted today. As for the documents, we are working on compiling them, but some of the files are incomplete due to the transition between management companies last year." I said, "Incomplete how?" He said, "Some of the older notices and meeting minutes were not transferred in the digital format, and we are trying to locate physical copies." I said, "The hearing notice I supposedly missed was 5 days ago. That is not an old file. Where is the proof I was notified?" He went quiet for a few seconds, then said, "I will have to get back to you on that." That afternoon, I got an email from Deborah. It was not sent through the management company. It was directly from her personal email to mine, which violated the attorney's instruction that all communication should go through official channels. The email said, "You are making this harder than it needs to be. If you had followed the rules from the start, none of this would be happening. You still owe $750 in fines, and if you do not pay by Friday, the board will vote to file a lien. I have the votes. Stop wasting everyone's time." I forwarded it to my attorney without responding. He called me 5 minutes later and said, "She just handed you retaliation in writing. Do not reply. Let her keep digging." That night, I went outside to clear the new snow that had fallen during the day. It was light, maybe 2 inches, and the temperature was dropping fast. As I was finishing the driveway, I saw Deborah walking up the street with another woman I did not recognize. They stopped in front of my house, and Deborah pointed at my driveway edge, talking to the other woman and gesturing. I could not hear what she was saying, but I could see her pulling out her phone and taking photos. I stood there with the shovel, watching them, and Deborah looked up and saw me. She said something to the other woman, and they both walked away. I went inside and checked the community Facebook group. There was a new post from Deborah, posted 10 minutes ago, with photos of my driveway edge and a caption that said, "Another example of non-compliance creating hazards for the entire route. This is why enforcement matters." The photos were taken at an angle that made the small berm left by the plow look like a massive pile I had dumped there myself. I took screenshots of the post and the comments. 3 people had already replied, calling me out by address and saying I was being selfish. One person said I should be fined double for repeat violations. Another person said the board should revoke my parking privileges entirely. I did not reply. I just saved everything and sent it to my attorney. On Friday, February 17th, the board held an emergency meeting. I was not invited. I found out about it from Lena, who saw the notice posted on the community board at the mailbox kiosk. The notice said the meeting was to address ongoing compliance issues and to vote on lien filings for delinquent accounts. My address was listed. I called my attorney immediately. He said, "They cannot file a lien without giving you a hearing. If they vote tonight, the lien is invalid." I said, "What do I do?" He said, "Show up. You do not need an invitation. It is a board meeting, and under Vermont law, homeowners have the right to attend and speak. I am coming with you." We got to the meeting at 6:45 p.m. It was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance to the neighborhood. There were 8 people in the room, 5 board members, Deborah, Eric the property manager, and 1 other homeowner I did not recognize. When I walked in with my attorney, the board president, a man named Greg, looked up and said, "This is a closed session." I said, "No, it is not. This is a regular board meeting, and I am a homeowner. You are voting on a lien against my property, and I have the right to be here." Greg looked at Eric, who looked at Deborah. Deborah stood up, clipboard in hand, and said, "He does not have standing because he has not submitted a formal request to attend." My attorney said, "There is no such requirement under Vermont law or your own bylaws. He is staying." Greg sighed and said, "Fine. Sit down. We will get to your issue in a minute." They went through 2 other agenda items, minor budget approvals, and then Greg said, "Next item is compliance and lien filings. Eric, can you give us the summary?" Eric pulled up a spreadsheet on a laptop and started reading off addresses and amounts. When he got to mine, he said, "This property has $750 in outstanding fines for snow route violations, failure to attend compliance hearings, and unauthorized vendor activity. The homeowner has not responded to multiple notices, and staff recommends proceeding with lien filing. I stood up. I said, I have responded to every notice. I have filed a records request. I have submitted a formal complaint to the state. And I have proof that the notices you are referencing either do not exist or were backdated. My attorney handed me a folder, and I pulled out the certified letter that arrived after the hearing date. I held it up and said, "This notice is dated February 9th, claiming I missed a hearing that day." It was postmarked February 12th. I could not attend a hearing I was not told about until after it happened. Deborah cut in, "You were notified verbally during the tow truck incident." I said, "That is not notice, that is harassment, and you know it." She said, "I do not care what the weather did, I care what the rule says. You were given time to comply, and you chose not to." My attorney said, "Do you have proof that notice was properly delivered?" Deborah looked at Eric. Eric looked at the board president. Greg said, "Deborah, do we have the notice documentation?" Deborah hesitated, then said, "It is in the file." Eric said, "I do not have it with me." Greg said, "Then we are tabling the lien vote until we have the documentation." Deborah snapped, "We have been dealing with this for months. We cannot keep delaying enforcement because he wants to play lawyer." Greg said, "We are not voting without the paperwork. That is final." I sat down. My attorney leaned over and whispered, "They just admitted they do not have it. That is huge." I nodded, but I could feel Deborah staring at me from across the room. After the meeting, as everyone was packing up, Deborah walked over to me and said, "You think you won something tonight, but you are just making this worse for yourself. I can make this a lien conversation in one email." I looked her in the eye and said, "You already said that." Twice. And I recorded it both times. She went pale, turned around, and walked out. Lena was waiting in the parking lot when I came out. She said, "How did it go?" I said, "They tabled the lien vote." She said, "That is good, right?" I said, "It is good for now." But Deborah is not done. Over the next 3 days, I got 4 more certified letters. Each one claimed a different violation: driveway edge snow, unauthorized exterior modification, failure to respond to prior notice, and improper waste container placement. Every single one referenced hearings or warnings I had never received. It was a paper blitz designed to bury me in procedural debt before I could fight back. My attorney reviewed them all and said, "This is harassment. They are trying to create a false record to justify the lien. We need to move fast." He drafted a motion for injunctive relief and filed it in small claims court, asking a judge to block any lien filing until the HOA produced proof of proper notice. The hearing was set for March 2nd, 2 weeks away. On February 23rd, the contractor called again. He said, "I got the all clear from the HOA to come out, but I need to do it this week before the freeze. Can you be there Thursday morning?" I said yes, and he came out on the 24th. He inspected the roof, confirmed there was an ice dam forming, and said he could fix it, but it would take 2 days and cost $1,800. I told him to do it. While he was working on the roof, Deborah showed up. She parked in the street, got out with her clipboard, and walked up to the contractor's truck. She asked him if he had authorization to be there. He said he did, that the management company had cleared it. She said, "I need to see the approval in writing." He said, "I do not carry that with me." She said, "Then you need to leave." I came outside and said, "He is not leaving. This is emergency maintenance, and you do not have the authority to stop it." Deborah turned on me and said, "Unauthorized vendor work is a violation. You are racking up fines faster than you can pay them." I said, "I am not paying any fines until you prove they are legitimate." She said, "The board already voted." I said, "No. They tabled it. You were there." She pulled out her phone and started taking photos of the contractor's truck, his equipment, and the work he was doing on the roof. The contractor looked at me and said, "I cannot work if she is going to file complaints. This is not worth losing my license." I said, "She is bluffing. Keep working." He shook his head and said, "I am sorry." He packed up his tools, got in his truck, and left. I stood there in the driveway watching the contractor drive away, and Deborah said, "You brought this on yourself. If you had just followed the rules, none of this would be happening." I said, "What rules? Show me the rule that says I cannot have emergency roof work done." She said, "Exterior work requires architectural committee approval." I said, "I have approval. From 2 years ago. For this exact work." She froze. I saw her face change. She said, "That approval expired." I said, "No, it did not. It was for permanent modifications, and it included a clause about snow-related maintenance. I have the paperwork." She said, "The file was lost." I said, "I have my copy." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I had taken of the original approval document. I turned the screen toward her and said, "Right here. Board vote from March 2023. Approved 6-1. You voted yes." She stared at the screen, and I saw her jaw tighten. She said, "That does not apply to this situation." I said, "Yes, it does. And when I submit this to the court next week, the judge is going to see that you have been lying about it for 6 months." She turned and walked back to her car without another word. I called the contractor and left a message asking him to come back and finish the work, but he did not call me back. That night, I got an email from the board president. It said the board had reviewed my complaint and determined that all fines were valid, all notices were properly delivered, and the lien filing would proceed unless payment was received by March 1st. It also said that continued interference with board operations could result in additional penalties, including suspension of community privileges. I forwarded it to my attorney. He replied, "This is retaliation in writing. Bring it to the hearing. We are going to bury them." On March 2nd, I went to Small Claims Court. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. My attorney and I sat on one side of the courtroom, and on the other side sat Eric, the property manager, Deborah, and a lawyer the HOA had hired. The judge came in, reviewed the motion, and asked the HOA's attorney to present their case. The HOA's attorney stood up and said, "Your Honor, the homeowner has been in violation of multiple community rules for several months. He has failed to attend compliance hearings, failed to respond to notices, and failed to pay fines. The association is within its rights to file a lien for delinquent fees." The judge looked at me and said, "Do you have a response?" My attorney stood up and said, "Yes, Your Honor. The homeowner has never received proper notice of any hearing. The association has failed to produce documentation proving that notices were delivered, and in fact, we have evidence that at least one notice was backdated and mailed after the hearing date." He handed the judge a folder with copies of everything: the certified letter, the email admission, the time-stamped photos, the contractor's email, and the approved architectural request. The judge spent 5 minutes reviewing the documents. Then, he looked at the HOA's attorney and said, "Do you have proof that notice was properly delivered?" The HOA's attorney looked at Eric. Eric looked at Deborah. Deborah said, "The notice was delivered verbally during an enforcement action on February 14th. The judge said, "Verbal notice of a formal hearing is not sufficient. Do you have written proof that notice was mailed or delivered before the hearing date?" Eric said, "We are still compiling the records." The judge said, "You are still compiling records from 3 weeks ago?" Eric said, "There was a management company transition, and some files were not transferred properly." The judge said, "That is not the homeowner's problem. If you do not have proof of notice, you cannot enforce penalties based on a hearing that may not have been properly noticed." He looked at my attorney and said, "I am granting the injunction. No lien will be filed until the association produces complete documentation proving proper notice and proper process." He looked at the HOA's attorney and said, "I suggest you get your records in order before you come back to my courtroom." We walked out of the courtroom, and my attorney said, "That was a clean win. They have nothing." I said, "What happens now?" He said, "They either drop the fines or they produce the records, and based on what we just saw, they do not have the records." That afternoon, I got a call from Lena. She said, "You need to see this." I went over to her place, and she showed me her phone. There was a thread in the neighborhood Facebook group where someone had posted a question asking why the HOA was spending so much money on legal fees. Another person had replied with a screenshot of the latest budget report, showing that the association had spent over $12,000 on legal and compliance actions in the last 3 months. Someone else commented, "Who are they suing?" And another person replied, "Not suing. Harassing one homeowner over snow." The thread exploded. People started asking questions. Who is the homeowner? What did he do? Why is this costing so much? Someone posted, "Is this the guy on Maplewood who had the tow truck show up?" And someone else replied, "Yes, and Deborah has been taking photos of his house every other day." By that evening, there were over 50 comments. Half the neighborhood was asking why the board was wasting money on what looked like a personal vendetta. A few people defended Deborah, saying enforcement was necessary, but most people were angry about the cost. On March 4th, the board called an emergency meeting. This time, it was open to all homeowners and the clubhouse was packed. Over 30 people showed up. I sat in the back with Lena and my attorney. Greg, the board president, opened the meeting and said, "We are here tonight to address concerns about recent compliance actions and legal costs." Deborah stood up immediately and said, "The reason costs are high is because one homeowner has refused to cooperate, filed frivolous complaints, and forced the association to defend itself in court. If he had just paid his fines, none of this would have happened." Someone in the audience said, "What fines? What did he do?" Deborah said, "Multiple snow route violations, failure to attend hearings, unauthorized vendor work." Another person said, "I have lived here for 10 years and I have never heard of anyone being fined for snow before. What is different now?" Greg tried to regain control, but the room was buzzing. Someone else stood up and said, "I got a notice last month for leaving my trash can out 1 hour past pickup." Is that what we are spending money on now? Enforcement of 1-hour rules? Another person said, "I thought the HOA was supposed to handle common area maintenance, not patrol people's driveways." Lena stood up and said, "I have been documenting interactions between Deborah and this homeowner for 2 months. She has shown up at his house multiple times, threatened him with towing, blocked his contractor from doing emergency roof work, and sent him over a dozen notices in 3 weeks. That is not enforcement. That is harassment." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, asking questions, demanding answers. Greg banged a gavel and said, "We are going to take a recess. The board needs to discuss this privately." Someone shouted, "No private discussions. We want answers now." Greg looked at the other board members, then at Deborah. He said, "Deborah, did you block a contractor from doing roof work?" Deborah said, "The contractor did not have proper authorization." Greg said, "Did the homeowner have an approved architectural request?" Deborah hesitated, then said, "The file was incomplete." I stood up and said, "I have the full approval right here." I pulled out the printed copy of the architectural request and the board meeting minutes from 2 years ago. I walked to the front and handed it to Greg. He read it, passed it to the other board members, and then looked at Deborah. He said, "This is a valid approval. It includes a snow maintenance clause. Why did you tell the contractor he could not work?" Deborah said, "I do not care what the weather did. I care what the rule says." Greg said, "The rule says he has approval." Deborah, did you read this document before you took enforcement action? She did not answer. One of the other board members, a woman named Susan, said, "I want to see all the notices that were sent." Eric, can you pull them up? Eric opened his laptop and pulled up a file. He scrolled through it, and his face went pale. He said, "Some of these notices do not have delivery confirmation." Susan said, "Which ones?" Eric said, "Most of them." Another board member said, "How is that possible?" Eric said, "The notices were generated by Deborah directly. I was not involved in the delivery process." Greg said, "Deborah, did you mail these notices yourself?" She said, "I hand-delivered them." Greg said, "Do you have proof?" She said, "I do not need proof. I am the enforcement officer." Susan stood up and said, "This is a disaster. We have spent $12,000 defending actions that were not properly documented. We could be sued. We need to retract everything and start over." Greg said, "I agree." He looked at me and said, "On behalf of the board, I apologize. We are going to launch an internal audit of all compliance actions taken in the last 6 months, and we are going to issue a written retraction of any notices that were improperly delivered." Deborah said, "You cannot do that. I have authority under the bylaws." Greg said, "Your authority is not unlimited, and it does not include ignoring procedure. As of tonight, you are removed from the architectural committee and you are no longer authorized to take enforcement actions." The room went silent. Deborah stood there, clipboard in hand, staring at Greg. Then she said, "I can make this a lean conversation in one email." Greg said, "No, you cannot. You are done." Someone in the audience started clapping. Then, someone else joined in. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Deborah turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. After the meeting, Greg pulled me aside and said, "We are going to issue a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive. Deborah is not allowed to contact you directly anymore. If she does, call the management company and we will handle it." I said, "What about the contractor? Can I get him back to finish the roof?" Greg said, "Absolutely. We will send a letter to him today confirming that all work is approved and authorized." The next morning, the contractor called me back. He said, "I got the letter. I can come out tomorrow and finish the job." I said, "Thank you." He came out on March 6th, finished the ice dam repair, and did not have any issues. On March 8th, I received a formal letter from the board. It included a written retraction of all fines, a confirmation that no lien would be filed, and a directive that Deborah Morgan was prohibited from contacting me outside of official board meetings. The letter also included a copy of the internal audit findings, which showed that over 20 notices sent in the last 6 months had no delivery confirmation, and at least 5 were backdated. The state HOA ombudsman called me on March 10th and said my complaint had been reviewed, and the association was being required to implement new notice and enforcement procedures. The ombudsman also said that if I experienced any further retaliation, I should contact them immediately and they would escalate to the Attorney General. On March 15th, the board held another meeting. This time, it was to vote on new enforcement policies. The policies included requirements for written notice with delivery confirmation, mandatory waiting periods before fines could be assessed, and a prohibition on board members taking unilateral enforcement actions. The vote passed unanimously. Deborah did not attend the meeting. I heard from Lena that she had resigned from the board entirely and was planning to sell her house. In mid-April, I was outside clearing the last of the spring snow when Lena came over and said, "Did you see the email?" I said, "What email?" She showed me her phone. The HOA had sent a correction email retracting the smear that had been posted on the Facebook group. The email said that prior statements about compliance actions against a homeowner on Maplewood were based on incomplete information, and that the board regretted any harm caused. Lena said, "That is as close to an apology as you are going to get." I said, "I will take it." A few weeks later, I was at the mailbox kiosk picking up a package when I saw a new notice on the community board. It said the board had voted to censure Karen in public, strip her committee powers, and ban her from contacting homeowners outside official meetings. It also said that any future enforcement actions would require a majority board vote and would be subject to appeal. I took a photo of the notice and sent it to my attorney. He replied, "You did it. Full accountability." I said, "It took 6 months and almost destroyed my roof, but yes." He said, "You had the receipts, and that is what mattered." That same week, I ran into one of the board members at the grocery store. He said, "I just want to say, I am sorry we let it get that far. We should have stepped in sooner." I said, "I appreciate that." He said, "For what it is worth, you changed the culture here. People are paying attention now. They are not going to let one person run wild again." In May, I got a call from the contractor. He said, "I heard what happened. I am glad it worked out." I said, "Thanks for sticking with me." He said, "I see this kind of thing all the time. HOAs get out of control because nobody pushes back. You did. That matters." By summer, things had calmed down completely. The new enforcement policies were working. The board was following procedure. Deborah had moved out, and the house was sold to a young couple with a toddler. Lena and I became good friends, and she helped me organize a neighborhood barbecue in July. Over 40 people showed up, and for the first time in months, it felt like a real community again. Looking back, the whole thing taught me that you cannot let these situations spiral. You have to document everything, you have to know the rules, and you have to be willing to fight when someone abuses their power. Deborah thought she could bury me in paperwork and intimidation, but she did not count on me keeping receipts. She said nobody complains, and then a stack of complaints appeared. The HOA sent a correction email retracting the smear, and Karen was ordered to stop contacting me directly. I walked away with a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive, and she walked away with nothing. My mother moved back to her apartment in June after the landlord finally fixed the heat. She told me she was proud of how I handled it, and that meant more to me than any board apology. The roof repair held up through the rest of the winter, and I did not have any water damage. The contractor sent me a holiday card in December, which made me laugh. The neighborhood is quieter now. The enforcement policies are still in place. The board rotated in 2 new members in the fall election, and both of them campaigned on transparency and accountability. I voted for them, and so did Lena. I still see the folded snow emergency policy sheet sometimes when I am going through old papers. It reminds me of how absurd the whole thing was, and how close it came to costing me real money and real damage. But it also reminds me that standing up works, as long as you have the proof to back it up. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all the support.